James O'Dea is someone that some of us know well. Others of you perhaps have heard of him. This is another extraordinary worker in the world, a peacemaker, social healer, executive. He may not see himself as an executive, but anyway, he went in Ireland, been living for a long time, and was the Washington director for Amnesty International, director of the Sega Foundation, and I first came across James when he became president of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and saw him in the garden at the Institutional Center introducing himself. He was introduced by Lou Franklin, the retiring director, and James went around and gave a blessing talk. I've never seen anything like it in my life, but it was around a huge circle outside. I thought, my God, this guy's not just an executive, but I mean, there are so many dimensions to what he does. At IONS, what I was aware of was what's his organization that really is working with science and consciousness. And what he did was, along with brought in some people like Steve Diamond and some others, to really bring the power of this message out to the public, and built a program called Shift in Action. He may give Stephen credit for this, but I think James was very much behind it. He is now living in Crestone, Colorado, teaching, talking. I came across some words. James was introducing a program he has called the Peace Ambassador training program, a 5-month training program. And when we heard the introduction of the program, something happened. So here's somebody speaking. There's no fourth way. This was just James talking on the internet. And I thought, it's happening. It's happening again right now. And what he was teaching us, we think about Libra and what it means to be a peace builder, peacemaker within oneself, in all of our relations and with humanity. This is the kind of work that he does. Now, James, I'm sorry. Please come join us. And the group you're in charge of right now, I've lost the name. I don't know. My mind is drifting, but you can fill us in. You're director of is the Social Healing Project? Or
Yes.
Yes, wonderful. So please welcome James O'Dea.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I had such fun at Sophia's workshop, and we did some shouting, and I lost my voice. So interesting theme this evening around the song and singing the world into existence. Let me just read the opening piece I had chosen by Orpin Gallic and Netsilik Inuit. Songs are thoughts which are sung out with the breath when people let themselves be moved by a great force, and ordinary speech no longer suffices. A person is moved like an ice floe which drifts with the current. His thoughts are driven by a flowing force when he feels joy, when he feels fear, when he feels sorrow. Thoughts can surge in on him, causing him to gasp for breath and making his heart beat faster. Something like the softening of the weather will keep him thawed. Something like the softening of the weather will keep him thawed. And then it will happen that we, who always think of ourselves as small, will feel even smaller. And we will hesitate before using words. But it will happen that the words that we need will come of themselves. When the words that we need shoot up of themselves, we have a new song. Yes. I was in London some years ago, and there was a man with a wheelbarrow full of books, and he was wheeling into a corner where he was going to sell books from his barrow, and one of the books fell off the wheelbarrow, and I picked it up to give it to him, and then I looked at the title, And I said, I'm going to buy this book. It was called Dreams and Memories of Paradise. And of course, in the myth, the many myths across the planet, there is those stories of us as intuitive beings, as beings who lived easily in nature, who didn't eat animals, who lived in relationship to other beings in a very peaceful way. You remember this, don't you? Go back. Myth is the DNA of culture. Just go into your DNA and you'll find it there. And then, of course, so many of those myths agree that something happens. There's a disturbance in the force. There is the fall. There is the falling away. There's the eating of the fruit of knowledge. And something happens when you eat that particular fruit. What happens when you eat knowledge? You get cast out of the garden, don't you? Paradiso means the walled garden in Farsi. And in the Bible it says, beautifully, like this great hint, as Adam and Eve are holding their crotches and walking away out of the garden, it is said that an angel is sent to the eastern gate with a flaming sword to guard the way back to the tree of life. Hint, hint. So after the tree of knowledge, eventually comes the tree of eternal life. But something happens on the way. And that sense of the original story, that sense of the golden age, of the perfect time and its loss, is captured, isn't it, in the notion of the song lines. You know this concept in Australia amongst the Aboriginal people. What are the song lines? They walk the song lines, and in walking the song lines, they remember, they connect with the song of the land, and the song of the event that happened there, and the song of the ancestor who came by. And there's this convening of culture and place and cosmology and integration. And in so many of the indigenous traditions, there is this injunction, remember the original instructions. Remember that voice that tells us who we are. Because the way back is not the contents of the fruit of the tree of knowledge. It is, in fact, the keeper, the holder of the knowledge. So when you get back to the eastern gate, that angel with the shining sword is going to say, and do you know who you are? After all that journeying that you've done. And so, in my own story, I was conceived on the eve of my sister's death. So I was actually conceived on November the 10th, and my sister died on November the 11th. She fell down the steps of school and broke her spine, and my mother, in the early months of mourning her loss, discovers that she is carrying a child. And so we know, of course, in the science that the first cells to congregate in the embryo are the formation of the heart. So here my heart is forming, my being is forming around her suffering, around her mourning. I'm literally trying to climb up to her heart to make it easier for her. That's my embryonic experience. That's my pattern setter. That's my soul's journey. And you'll see in a moment where that takes me. But I experience tremendous sorrow and loss in that state. And then I'm born, and my mother in her wisdom, she says, okay, this is the time to end the period of mourning now and to celebrate little Jimmy. And this pattern is the pattern that's been set for my life, the pattern of suffering and celebration. And I believe it's a tremendously powerful archetypal pattern, because as my life moved ahead, I began to serve those who were suffering. As a teenager, when my family moved from Ireland to England, I started organizing teenagers in London to help the senior citizens and to survey their needs, and the government got upset, and I got an award as Teenager of the Year. And the head of the Social Welfare Authority actually wrote to me and said, I think it would be better if we would meet rather than, facing all these criticisms in the public. And I wrote back and said, you know what you have to do, and when you do it, we can meet. And I guess that was a little arrogant, but as my life progressed, I moved into places like Turkey, where I was vice principal of the school during a whole period of civil turmoil. I was knifed personally. My house was machine gunned. I saw firsthand what it's like to see a society break apart. I went from there to Beirut. And so we're talking about now that descent into real trauma and suffering. I was there during the war, during the massacre of the Palestinians. And, during that particular massacre, all of the lights were out in Beirut. It was like a symbol of the darkness for me. And I was part of the Middle East Council of Churches, and they had a medical team working in the camps. And when the doctors came back in the morning, they told the story of how children were murdered under their beds, whole families slaughtered around the dinner table. I was taken through that process of contemplating the darkest suffering, and I really thought the lights in my own life had gone out. I mean, when you face close up that kind of difficulty and savagery, where do you go? Usually it's right there, the lowest point, that the light gets sharpest. That fractal is also everywhere. It's just we need to have the eyes to see it, or the experience to experience it. But a few weeks after that experience of Sabra Shatila, which I couldn't erase from my mind, I went south to another Palestinian camps there since 1948, and flattened to the ground. I mean, bricks and mortar camps we're talking about, because they were there for so many years. And in the middle of this ocean of rubble with twisted metal and black flags, there is a man beckoning, Yallah, come. And I'm with the medical team, and we go over because maybe he needs some help. And he says, please have coffee with me. And we say, no. He says, no, please have coffee with me. And, there's a slab of cement which was the roof of his house, and he pulls out this Calagas stove and the little Arabic coffee maker, and he begins to make coffee with that flick of the wrist, as the coffee heats up and you gets to a boil and then you lift it off. And then he talked about his childhood. There was no anger, there was no violence, there was no resentment in his being. And it was right at that moment that I saw the indestructible spirit that could never be bombed away. The spirit standing in this being. The dignity of the spirit, quite indomitable spirit of the human being. There I saw the spirit having a physical human experience, luminous, shining through the utter desolation and darkness of these experiences. That's my journey. That's my journey as a witness to you. And for reasons which the universe only understands, I was taken more and more into those kinds of experiences. 10 years in Amnesty International. Can you imagine, as the director in Washington, every day waking up to the savagery and brutality and cruelty, the endless cruelty against people who are brought onto torture slabs, who are tortured in unbelievable ways. And yet, there was no force on earth that could break the sight of witnessing in my being, that could witness what was really there, to really look and see that I had been given this task, this role, this opportunity to look into the hells of the world and to see the light. To see people like Juan Carlos Rodriguez on the torture slab in Argentina, telling me in a taxi in New York about how one day the torture was so intense that he thought he was going to die. And the torturer and the tortured the torturer is trying to erase, to make you a nothing, to make you a lesser human being, to make you an object or objectify you, right? And right in that intensity of the objectification process, he has this thought, because his wife has just had a child, even as he lies on the torture slab. And the thought he has is, I hope that one day my son knows and hears that his father was a noble human being who died nobly in a noble cause. Look at the luminosity of that. Look at the conscience. Look at the beauty in extrema. The inextinguishable beauty. Wow. Those are the eyes that I have. Those are the eyes that I witness this world. And those song lines, those are the song lines that are coming through the very crevices of the darkness. Those are the song lines of human spirit awakening, of the absolute proof. If you ever needed the proof that the spirit is inextinguishable. And they carry the song for all of humanity. They carry our song. In Rwanda, 16 years after the genocide, Rwanda is a model of reconciliation, of forgiveness, of restorative justice. Devota, who with her 2 children went to a church that I visited where 10,000 people were slaughtered in that particular church. And as she was approaching the church, they said, "Run for your life, Devota." She had a I think it was a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old daughter, 5-year-old son and 2-year-old daughter. She runs into the marshes. She puts her son in a little cabin, says, "Don't come out until Mommy tells you. Mommy comes back for you." She takes her daughter, but they come after them into the swamps. And they machete her, and she goes unconscious. And when she wakes up, her daughter has been macheted to death. And she crawls trying to get to the cabin where her son is, but she is somehow pulled into a larger hut, and it is set on fire. And she says, "I don't know what happened, but I believe whether in the human form or in the transhuman form, an angel pulled me out. I see this force of light pulling me out of the cabin." And she crawls to the little hut where her son has suffocated to death. Devota in this story finds the men responsible and feels the presence of the Christ Spirit in her and says, "I forgive you." This is the songline, this is the paradigm of the human experience. This is you in your essence. This is you indestructible. This is our destiny as a species. These are the holders of the way. I have been in dialogue with former Nazi and Holocaust survivors, and I can tell you that they have opened the way in the human field, because we in this audience, we know about that field. We know that when it is templated at that depth and quality and resonance, history is transformed. Mary Rothschild and Gottfried live in dialogue, and Mary says to Gottfried, here are the 23 names of the 23 relatives of mine that were killed in the camps. What was your role in this story? And Gottfried said, well, I was in the Hitler Youth and I beat up Jews and I burnt homes, but I didn't take them to the gas chamber. And she hunts him, she follows him because she needs the truth. And she says, if you had been 10 years older, would you have taken my relatives into the gas chambers? See, dialogue doesn't need to be pretty, does it? Dialogue can be fully naked in the hunt for the truth. She asks him, would you have done this? And after a long pause, he says, I just don't know. We were pulled up by this force. I don't know. And Mary says that answer saved her life, changed her life, because she heard the resonance of truth in the voice of the perpetrator. She heard the truth of his experience. You don't say, I could have been a mass murderer to pass the time of day. And later in the dialogue, Gottfried says, I live in the dungeon of history. My children are the children of the Nazi. You know this story, don't you? You know it because you're breaking this story, just as Gottfried and Mary broke it. I'm the grandfather. My grandchildren are the grandchildren of the Nazi. We want the story to continue forever. I live in the dungeon of history, and along comes this woman, this Jewish woman, and she throws a bridge across the abyss for me to come out of the abyss of history. Are you with me? Are you listening? Are you seeing the reality that it has been done for us? And Mary says to Gottfried at the end of this dialogue, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, yet I shall fear no ill, for thou art with me. So it's over, as far as I can tell, in the deep, deep story. When the Jew says to the Nazi, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, yet I shall fear no ill, for thou who art my persecutor, thou who art the perpetrator, are at my side. That is our destiny. It is all completed. And we are called to be witnesses of this perfection. How do we witness in these times, this incredible hour in human history, when, as we know, apocalypse means unveiling? We are the witnesses of the unveiling. How do we witness? How do we witness the fall? How do we witness the matrix of the cacophony of meanness and hostility? How do we witness it all with the eyes that see the perfection, that see the beauty all the way down to the very end of the story? We witness in non-judgment. We are called to non-judgment. Judgment is the barrier. There is no lesser being on the face of this earth. There is no lesser being on the face of this earth. And the witnessing capacity knows that. It knows that all of this theater of existence has its perfection in ways that we cannot even begin to imagine. So standing in non-judgment allows us to cleanse the doors of perception, to open the field of the heart, to say, where but for the grace of God go I, to see that it is only the role that you've been given in this existence. Whew. And after non-judgment, what emerges? If you look at the construct of judgment, you'll see it. If it's held in the body, it'll be there in the cellular memory, it'll be there in the heart muscle, it'll be there in the stomach ulcers, it will be there in every form of trapped energy, right? Because that's what judgment is. It says, hold up, universe, you made a big mistake. You're the guilty party. You shall be punished. Judgment and punishment go together, don't they? What has happened in this nation? That in this nation, almost 1/3 of the people imprisoned on planet Earth are imprisoned in the United States. Did you know that? Let me repeat that. Almost 1/3 of all human beings imprisoned on planet Earth are imprisoned in the United States of America. Yes, that is punishment gone mad. It's punishment taken on baseball metaphors. 3 strikes and you're out. Just warehoused, get them out of sight. How do we witness in ways that say, those are human beings? That is me imprisoned. how do we restore the circle? How do we bring restorative justice? Restorative justice begins to melt the harshness of that judgmentalism and that punitive worldview, doesn't it? It says there's a circle of responsibility. In one of the dialogues I held, Ada Pecos Melton, a Native American lawyer in the Native American justice work, told me the story of a grandmother whose house was attacked by two young men. They didn't realize it, but she was in the house. She was hiding behind a curtain. They came in, they broke things, they vandalized her home. And she, hiding behind the curtain, was able to see who was responsible. And so when the convening happened, they called the whole community together with the two young offenders. And the grandmother went first to the paternal uncle and said, "Uncle, what were you doing? Were you looking out for these young boys?" And to the maternal uncle, the paternal uncle, and the mother and the father, all the way around the circle. "Neighbor, were you watching out for me? Were you watching out for them?" Until she came to the boys themselves. "Boys, did I do something to offend you?" So you see what is unfolding in this process is the circle of community, is the admission of our oneness, is the admission of our connectedness. Not just as an abstract, we're all connected, but as an embodiment of justice. And when she gets to the two young boys, she says, "Now, you're going to have to come and repair my home." And in fact, there was a really nice kitchen cabinet that I saw that I'd like you to build for me. So to complete the sense of atonement and responsibility. So when we think about what is possible, it's here, isn't it? When that judgment and punitive ideologies start to melt, we see the restorative possibilities. We see the emergence of the subtle human being, the emergence of the dialogic human being, the emergence of the loving human being. And I can tell you, in story after story, that these beings are emerging all over the planet. They are showing the way. The cacophony of insanity on the media often misses this story. You have to go to Rwanda. You have to go to Israel-Palestine. You would think from all we hear of Israel-Palestine that people are just monstrously hateful towards each other, right? But in fact, more every day, more and more people join what is called the Bereaved Family Forum, started by the Shahaks in Israel, whose 16-year-old daughter was blown up in a terrorist attack. When they were finally clearing out her room, they found her diary. And in her diary she said, "I dream of peace with the Palestinians." Look at the structure of that story. The daughter writes, "I dream of peace with the Palestinians." She goes, she is blown up by a Palestinian. Her parents come and find the diary, and it speaks to their heart, it speaks to their spirit. And they go looking for Palestinian families who have experienced this kind of loss. If you're in as much pain as we are, let's change the story, they said. Part of our task is to tell these stories, is to believe. We know centrally in the transformational cauldron, the one central core element is belief. Isn't it? As you believe, so shall reality be. What do you really believe? How do you incarnate your belief? How do you embody it? How do you take it out of the abstraction? You see, the thing about the song line is just as I was saying in the case of the Aboriginals, that it's not an abstraction. They say you can never find a lost Aboriginal because they are feeling into the ley lines. They're feeling into the rhythms of the land. They're following the story of the creator beings who came into existence. They're following the cultural stories of what happened in that place. We live at a time when science is even helping us see that the subject-object relationship is a fallacy. It's a construct. Look behind me. Are these objects or are these emanations? Are you in an immanental environment? Follow me into the place where this is not a subject-object game. It's an intersubjective love-making arrangement. It's an intersubjective exchange. Every year I'm in dialogue with Native Americans and physicists that was started some years ago by David Bohm, the physicist. Most remarkable dialogues, by the way. And last year one of the Native elders was saying, you know, the reason why so many people move around is that they don't have a sense of place, that they don't have a connection to place, that they don't know the place. And you know what he said next? And they're not known by their place. Wow! They don't know their place, and they're not known by the place. Live in a place long enough to be known by the place. To be known by the place. To be known by the energies that exist in that place. To have a cosmic relationship in place. To enter the subjective relationship to the whole cosmic reality. That's the invitation, and science is right there with bended knee saying you cannot separate the observer and the observed. So we live at a time for peacemakers, for artists, for those following the beauty way, as never before. Like that opening for Moses, you know, where the waters part. And we see that the journey is one that is opening for us as a species, where science and spirituality are coming together, where all of the objectifications around race and identity and religion and nationality, all of the objectifications of nature and the crude rape and plunder of the earth being herself that have resulted from that objectification can be transformed, that this consciousness is opening up for us. And the story of our time is the story, as has been said, I think at several times during this conference, it's the story of you and me. It's the soul story of the so-called ordinary human being. Ha 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 ha. There is no ordinary human being. There is only extraordinary human being. And the consciousness is dawning, isn't it, everywhere in the planet. just the lightest, faintest glow you can see, but it's the dawn of that awareness that we are each extraordinary. We are each invited to participate in the transformation of this planet. In a social healing dialogue in Northern Ireland, I was doing some work, and during the break I went up to a so-called ordinary lady. Her name was Frances. She was in her 50s. I said to her, Frances, I'm really impressed with what you're doing for Catholic-Protestant reconciliation. I said, what motivated you? How did you get to be so involved in this work? She said, well, about 10 years ago I was walking down the street. I was a civil servant and I was about to go into my building when they started shooting from the roof and several people were hit and I was hit. And I started losing a lot of blood and I was taken to the hospital. I lost pints and pints of blood, she said. And when I woke up, the doctor was whispering to my family, we're trying to make her as comfortable as possible. She said, when you hear those words, you know, it's a little bit ominous. The doctor explained to her, Frances, you've got a bullet lodged next to your aorta. We cannot operate on you. It would be more dangerous to operate than to leave that bullet there. But some weeks passed and he came to her and said, you know, Frances, you're going to have to get on with your life. Wow, with a bullet next to my heart. And that's precisely what she did. This ordinary lady is walking around Londonderry with a bullet next to her heart, doing healing work. So I'd like you for a moment to think of this as a symbol for the planet at this point. That the bullet is in. The bullet is into Mother Nature. It really is. Since Earth Day, first Earth Day, 1/3 of our beautiful species have been wiped out. We know from the stirring on the planet, the poisoning of the planet, that the bullet is in. We know from the way the economic disorder is playing out that the bullet is in, right? But we are spirit. That is the majesty of that moment, isn't it? That even with the bullet in our being, in our body, in our collective being, in our Mother Earth being, we are spirit, able to transform matter, able to rise, to ascend, to reveal our true identity. I'm going to finish soon, but I wanted to tell you a little bit about Ireland, since I come from Ireland. And a few months back, I was in Ireland, invited to the Iceland project. It's an amazing example of what I've been talking about. So you know that in Iceland, the Icelandic economy got slammed in the very same way that the Irish one got slammed, you know. For about 12 years, they called the Irish economy the Celtic Tiger, just booming, and the banks around the world were slathering. They were coming and saying, take more loans, take more loans. Poor old Irish farmers were saying, what? You mean I should build a few mansions on my farm? Oh yes, very good idea. More mansions than there are people in Ireland, actually, now. But Iceland was the first to go down, wasn't it? And how did Iceland respond? They said, well, actually, you know, if you're a bank, you take risks. You know, why would you be insulated? They didn't privilege the banks. They said, okay, you lose. You made a risk and you lost. Seems normal to me. In Ireland, they didn't. They said, we're going to take the people's pension fund and put it up as collateral for the banks. So if it goes down, the whole pension fund of the Irish people goes down. And it's a disaster. I mean, but you know, there's something in the design of perfection where disasters are part of the plot. If you haven't worked that out yet, you could see, if you can see what I've seen, and you can see that I'm still smiling and radiating love and happiness. It must have something to do with the plot structure, hint, hint, you know. Get back to the other side of the garden. So at this meeting between Ireland and Iceland, people in Ireland called me over and said, you know, even though you're living in that strange country, you're still Irish. And we want you at this meeting. And we've called, you know, the Icelandic people artists, actors, theatre of the oppressed people, writers, economists, politicians. You see what they were doing from both sides. So they said, no, we can't have, you know, just one, you know, it has to represent the whole. It has to represent the whole society. And they said, tell us more. So it was a kind of a teaching. What did you do in Iceland? And they said, well, the first thing we did when it went down was the conscious people said, this is our moment. Take notes, please. This is our moment, they said. It's gone down. How many people in the United States said, this is our moment? Of course, this group is saying it. We've got to multiply this consciousness, right? So that people see when the banks come back, when this comes back, because they've just moved the furniture on the Titanic, right? I mean, you do know that. They're back to, I'm getting a big salary raise, I'm getting a big bonus, I'm doing lots of funny things with the hedge funds. I'm going, okay. Round 2 coming up. That in Iceland they said, those conscious people said, let's create a national assembly. 25,000 people were gathered for a conversation about what do you value, what is real, what do you want to see in your society. They said, we want to see politicians who have values. Funny idea. We're human beings. So out of that, they launched the best party. The best party. And the comedian who's now the mayor of Reykjavik and wildly popular ran for office, and of course the political establishment said, ha ha ha. They said, well, why are you running for office? He said, well, I hear politicians make good money. I mean, not the salary exactly, but you know, the other money. I want to get my hands on some of that. And then they said, you know, come on, be serious. He said, no, people are very depressed. They're depressed, we need more polar bears. And then his slogan was, I will not fulfill in office any promise that I make to you now. And so see what was happening. How do you get to people? You cannot use that order in this world. You have to go non-linear. It's a big clue for us that people are starved for the truth, but there are so many constellations of fakery and meanness and false promises that you have to find a non-linear way to get into the public psyche to say, this is the truth. And they recognized it. They recognized it deeply. Every week, this mayor of Reykjavik announces his favorite mistake of the week. Politicians don't do that. Good morning, Mr. President. What did you mess up in last week? It doesn't happen, but... And then they created something called the Ministry of Ideas. Now, the Ministry of Ideas is really brilliant. It goes like this. If you've got an idea for us, go away. Pretty good, isn't it? If there comes an idea for us, go away. If you've come with an idea that you are passionate about, that you want to do something about, and you want us with you, come on in. Be involved in it. Listen to this. This is true guidance. We have got to get out of the world of disembodied ideas. It's fatal. It's going that way, right? And so at the end of our meeting, we gathered the City Hall in Dublin with 300 people who'd registered to hear their thought from the experts. And we said, no. We're going to do a ministry of ideas with you, so this is how it works. If you have an idea that out of our group here, you're passionate about, you want to do something about, and you want support, put your hand up. There were people organizing all over the room. We organized the non-profits in Dublin. Young people saying, we want to do a radical poster campaign. So this is the moment too, isn't it, of spirit revealing, certainly in the ways that I have been seeing. When you go to the bottom of the barrel, it's not the bottom of the barrel. It's really not. So there is a way for us to move the story. We live in that moment when what seems to have been the mountain arresting our progress, the obstacle blocking our path, the insurmountable challenge, the almost annihilation of consciousness itself by corporate control and domination. We see that all of these things were our teachers, that the obstacle was my teacher, that every obstruction was some way an expansion of the story, was somehow, can you hear it? It was in that video that Helena and Sheldon saw it. You're catching my tone, aren't you? Can you hear it? That song of the humanity awakening, that indestructible voice of humanity aroused to be ourselves. This is the moment when we turn the story around. And we only turn that story around if we bow in reverence to the past. if we hospice it. You can't hospice by saying, you were totally wrong, you lived a nasty life, you were a mean old bugger, Sorry. To hospice the dying paradigm, you need that deep compassion. You need that eye of the witness. You need to see in every level of the story some mysterious perfection unfolding. And then you can turn and say, I have the energy, I have so much energy to midwife the birth, because what is coming is so ecstatically beautiful. Thank you.